Hello, everybody. I'm Samantha Steiner, and this is week 4 of multilingual nonfiction writing. I'm very excited for today. Today also happens to be my commencement from Sarah Lawrence College, so I'm officially an MFA, and I hope that will uh, enhance everyone's learning experience today. Anyway, today we're actually going to talk about language for a goal. And so to briefly review, our first week was really about the nature of translation and what we do with languages when we try to discuss them in terms of other languages. Week 2 is about languages that felt familiar to us, but not familiar to our readers. Week 3 was about the reverse, languages that might feel familiar to our readers, but not familiar to ourselves. And now, week 4 is what do we do with everything we've learned up to this point, and how do we create art from our experiences and from our knowledge of languages? And so, the big takeaway that I feel if we learn nothing else, let's learn this one, is the difference between the story on the surface and the story under the surface. The idea here is that readers only have so much RAM, so much storage space in their heads, that every word we deliver has to count. And I feel not just count as some like interesting or entertaining fact, but also something really intellectually nourishing, something meaningful, something emotionally charged. I know Horace once said that literature should be both sweet and useful. And I genuinely believe that. I think if the writing is not entertaining, then no one will continue to read. And if the writing is not somehow useful, maybe not in practical day-to-day sense, but useful to surviving and to navigating this world, then we'll forget it. And so in order to do that, there need to be multiple layers of meaning. And I think some of the strongest literature and some of the most beautiful pieces has those multiple layers of meaning so intertwined that we can't really tell them apart, that to talk about one layer is to talk about the other, but that they're both resonating. And so the idea of the situation in the story comes from Vivian Gornick, who has a wonderful essay that explains this in more detail. But the basic idea is that as nonfiction writers, we're working with a restraint. That is, we can only report events that actually happened, or else if we stray into events that didn't actually happen, we need to label them as fantasy or as our imaginings. And so this is great. Basically, we're working from our memories and our experiences, as if we have a giant collage that we're trying to make, and we're starting out with all of this material we've collected over the course of our lives. Now the question of how to sift through the amount of information we've collected over the course of our lives. Because even for someone who is in her 20s, such as myself, there's a lot of information there. And so I feel anyone who's gotten past adolescence probably has more than they even want to remember in some cases, but definitely a lot. And so the question is, what to include and what not to include. And so the idea of the situation in the story, the situation is everything that happened, everything we could possibly report. And the story are the pieces that ignite each other, that make meaning together. They're the ones that make it past this original litmus test. You can make many different stories depending on your goal, right? And this is true in human experience. We make our life narratives based upon what we go through, and 3 people could be at the same party and all report very different experiences at that same party. So that's what we do unconsciously in life. But now to create the situation in the story, I think the first step is to notice a pattern, to see whether in our minds, as we write down a story, as we simply report events, we keep bringing something up. And why does that feel important? And why do we always bring up this other thing, like let's say object B, right after object A? Why do those two things feel connected, even if we don't consciously feel that they're connected? That is the work of the writer. And it could be very healing work, very stressful work, Also incredibly satisfying work. So um, in order to delve a little deeper, I know these things might feel a little abstract for right now. We're actually going to look over a story that I wrote. I am very aware of the taboo against authors trying to teach their own writing, and I don't believe that my writing is anywhere near like aspirational. But let's. I feel I want to come at this from a humble place. So let's take a look at differences that I can make in my own writing, and the hope that everyone watching can make differences in their own writing too. And here I feel confident to be able to criticize myself and to explain my intentions and motivations. So just as a preface, I'm going to do a screen share on a piece that I actually wrote. This is called To the Current Tenant. It was published in Coffin Bell Journal. I'm going to first share the first draft, just a segment from the introduction, the very first draft that I wrote of this piece. And then I'll share that same segment as it was published in Coffin Bell Journal and just talk about the differences and how it evolved from writing that was mostly about situation to writing that was much more about story. So here we will get to the screen sharing. Let us arrange. Thank you all for patience. I am not technologically inept in my own eyes, but I'm sure that I will be in the eyes of like, whatever generation comes next. Okay, here we are. So, before, to the current tenant. The day after I was born, my parents brought me home to the place that is now your apartment. Then my mom took me and my brother, 2 years old at the time, to the playground. It was May, Mother's Day weekend, and while my brother raced up and down the jungle gym, my mom sat on a bench with me in her arms. Okay, so this first paragraph, there's a lot of detail being unloaded. And I think almost of the reader's mind like a colander. And this is not to insult. It's just the big important nuggets of information will stay in their head, but lots of little details will sift right through. And so this was an avalanche. So to the current tenant, it's a letter being written to somebody. From the context of this class, we know it's a nonfiction piece. The day after I was born, my parents brought me home to the place that is now your apartment. Then my mom took me and my brother, 2 years old. Well, why is it important that my brother is 2 years old? And does that 2 years old refer to me or to my brother? So there's a family, there's an apartment that is no longer belonging to this family. There's a person and a brother who's 2 years old. It's Mother's Day weekend. The brother's running around. The mom's on a bench. This is a lot. This is a little chaotic. Let's look at the next version we have. To the current tenant as the title, not as the introductory line. I have a relationship with your apartment. So here we have, this is not situation, this is story. This is the story we're telling. This is the deeper meaning that's under the surface. I was 15 hours old when my parents brought me to the playground next to the building where you now live. My brother zipped around the jungle gym while my dad followed at ground level with arms extended, ready to catch him if he tripped. My mom settled into a bench beneath a tree with me in her lap. The four of us spent a lot of weekends that way, and as soon as I was able to use a plastic shovel, my mom and I were in the sandbox making castles and cakes. Okay, so now we've clarified the relationship. So this is not just, we went to the park, this happened, this happened. This is the story of a family, the relationships between each other, right? Because we have the dad and the brother, and then the mom and the author, and the park as a place where family can exist. So this has been really made clearer. Let's go on. My brother demanded attention, but I was sneakier. If the quiet stretched too long, my mom would become suspicious. She would find me crawling up to the edge of the living room carpet, scooping up whatever gunk had accumulated there and chewing on it. No, Samantha, she would say, No, no. Prying my mouth open and picking out the soggy mess, the same way a mama bird deposits worms into her baby's mouth. My mother picked the dust and dirt of a New York City apartment out of mine. Okay, again, what is happening in this paragraph? The brother's demanding attention. So is this about the brother? But I was sneakier. So, and then the mom is suspicious. So then is this about the mom and the daughter? And this really bizarre image of the mama bird. And so let's see how I was able to sort of sift through it and find underneath all of that situation a little bit of story. Your living room, back when it was our living room, so this is about property and possession, was another kind of playground for me. Again, playgrounds. I amused myself quietly on the floor while my mom read a magazine. She was still reading when I slipped a hand under the carpet, dug out the clumps of the dust that had accumulated there, and stowed one in my mouth. My mom turned the page and looked up. No, Samantha. No, no. In a sort of reversal of a mother bird depositing food into her baby's beak, my mom inserted 2 fingers into my mouth and extracted the soggy mess. So, what's changed here? Well, one thing is we've clarified that this is not about the mom or the brother or the father or any of the characters. This is about the relationship. Again, to the very first line, I have a relationship with your apartment. And so that's the thread that I chose was the most emotionally resonant to me. And that's what I'm sticking with from beginning to end. So I remember I had to cut out a lot of details later in the body of this essay in order to keep the reader's attention where I wanted them. I know sometimes we feel that more details are enhancing the story, that they're important for context, but I'm usually surprised at how little the reader needs in order to keep up. And often introducing more information distracts from the central message. So again, um, this is about how intimate the narrator or I was with the apartment that I would eat the dust from under the carpet, and that this was a regular occurrence and that other characters in the story became aware of it. So, in this way, I've moved my mom to the background and the apartment to the foreground. Last paragraph, or at least of this excerpt. When I was old enough to handle a crayon and old enough to know better, I began drawing on the wall. I did it in small, accidental looking marks in the hallways, always closer to my eye level than my parents. A little streak in blue crayon near the kitchen, a zigzag in pencil by the large framed photo of the Brooklyn Bridge. When I learned to write, I marked up the moldings with Sam, there's with a backward S, over and over until my letters became less wobbly and more compact. My dad noticed a crayon streak on the wall only once and scolded me gently. I stopped marking up the walls for a little bit, but after a few days, I went right back to it, more discreetly this time. Okay, so again, first draft. It feels like something is happening, but it's not clear exactly what. So the narrator is handling crayons, the narrator is drawing on the walls, there's a photo of the Brooklyn Bridge, there's the name that appears, there's a dad who notices the crayon, and then the narrator who stops drawing on the walls and then does it again. So what does all of this mean? Why should the reader care about any of this? You'll notice in the next section that I'll cut out the line about the Brooklyn Bridge entirely. That I found it was just, I worried that it was too distracting, that it would light up associations in the reader's brain that I didn't want to light up. So it had to go. Kill your darlings, as they say. It becomes a lot less painful with practice. I learned to handle a crayon, and little marks began appearing on the moldings of your living room. Again, this is a letter to the current tenant, so we can't forget. A yellow dot, a green line. No one noticed. The marks climbed up toward the television, then as high as I could reach. Sam appeared on the wall in number 2 pencil. My first grade teacher told my dad I had developed outstanding handwriting. He was very pleased until he spotted a waxy blue backslash over the couch. Sam, he said, kneeling to make eye contact. Every so often, he tried to reassure himself that he was in charge of your apartment. Come on, he said, you know better. I resisted smiling until he walked away. A few days later, there was a fresh sprinkle of unseen graffiti on the wall of your larger bedroom, the place where my parents slept. So now we've zoomed in on the scene and added a little dialogue, the scene between father and daughter. And this line, which feels really humorous, darkly humorous, every so often he tried to reassure himself that he was in charge of your apartment. And this is me as narrator commenting on how foolish my dad was to think he was in charge of this apartment. But nestled around that story, actually, or that story is nestled within the story of me, or the narrator, claiming this apartment by drawing, first rather timidly, and then stamping the entire apartment with her name. And so I had to do a lot of thinking, what did all of that drawing on the wall mean? Why did that feel important? Because it was me putting my name inside every book of the library, metaphorically speaking. It was me claiming property as myself. And I did that through the medium of writing. And we can't forget on the meta level here that this is a work of writing. And so in some sense, I'm doing that again. At the same time as I'm doing that, I am pointing to how foolish an endeavor it is for anyone to think they are in charge of any apartment. And so I delve into that even more deeply later in the essay. But I think we can see, just looking at that original first draft, that there was so much energy in it, and clearly a story wanting to be told, but that it was being held down or weighted down by details we didn't need, by all of the situation. And it takes thinking and instinct and intuition. I really believe in making the decision that agrees with one's intuition over the one that makes logical sense. For me, on a personal level, I would rather regret following my intuition than regret ignoring it. Um, but really, to just summarize the difference between these two pieces, the first one does not yet know what it is. And that's great to start out writing. That's how all of my pieces begin, or most pieces, I would say. I think for everyone, once in a while, the story feels so clear that there's almost no situation. But the editing is usually done on the macro level first. I find that I sculpt really on a big level, like, what is this essay about? What is the story I am trying to tell, before I start picking what details should stay and which ones should go. And so the Brooklyn Bridge, I didn't know if I would need it. Maybe it was really a story about Brooklyn, or about my relationship with Brooklyn. And if it had been, that would have been a really important detail. So I think of it as almost sculpting, and like creating a sculpture of, or a bust of a face, or a face. And the idea is, I can't start working out the details of the eyelashes until I have the forehead and the cheeks and the nose all mapped out. So that is it for To the Current Tenant. If anyone is interested in reading the full essay, it's still up online at Coffin Bell Journal, along with a lot of other really wonderful pieces. I would very much recommend the other authors who are up there. And so what we'll do now is actually just take a quick look at the writing of a few other authors. These pieces actually come from the website, the literary journal Brevity, which is wonderful. All of the pieces are really short and bite-sized, and so I think they make great examples of what the difference between situation and story is. So for each of these, we'll read through the story and then talk about what is the story and what is the situation? What are we observing on the surface? So let us once again go to the land of screen sharing. Here we go. Okay. My Mother Calls Me by Michelle Myers. It was published on May 1st of this month, so very recent, very relevant to our class. Okay. I pick up my cell phone when I see it's my mom. Misha. I can tell by the way she says my name, something is wrong. My name, unpronounceable for her, the vowels moon bouncing on her tongue until they lose balance and fall over. And the consonant sound that would make her English stand upright, the L's forever out of reach. Misha. Again, so let's just take a moment to observe how this is a multilingual piece, right? How it's operating in English. And then the mom's vernacular, which we haven't yet identified with any language, but we've taken a look very much up close at the vowels moon bouncing and the L's out of reach. My mother is dying. Cancer of the blood, failing kidneys, broken spirit, homeless ghost. All are her ailments. She calls me on my phone because she doesn't have the strength to call my dad, who spends most of his time downstairs. Much of her life must have felt as though she was always out of earshot. Again, a piece that consciously is about hearing and listening. Misha, I have often wondered what my mom thinks when she says my name. I also wonder if this is where her frustration with me begins, at her inability to say my name, mother to daughter, bad connection, because she gave me a foreign name that she cannot pronounce. Michael, the name of the ambulance driver on the military base in Seoul, who rushed my mother to the hospital through a raging blizzard just in time for my mother to give birth to me. When my mother's labor pains started, my father told my mother to wait until the football game, probably the Super Bowl, was over. This ambulance driver held my mother's hand as my mother screamed in pain, pushing me pushing out into the world, refusing to wait any longer. When she got to the hospital, as she was being wheeled off the ambulance, she asked him his name. Michael, he answered. I'm going to name my baby after you, but I was born a girl. Mahiko. My brother, born 1 year, 5 months later, was given the name Michael. My mother says my brother's name is in almost perfect English. Oh, I'm sorry. My mother says my brother's name in almost perfect English. Misha, Michael. When my brother and I were little, my mom wrote our names in Korean on the Christmas present so that when we woke up extra early on Christmas morning and snooped through the gift under the tree, we wouldn't know which gifts were ours. So a moment to just appreciate, this is the first time that we acknowledge that the language is Korean. Earlier, we have a mention of Seoul, so we might suspect, but the suspense in not realizing or not understanding why there's this connection problem, right? This bad connection as the speaker refers to it. It's really fun to sort of protect the mystery for a lot of the piece, not in order to confuse the reader, but in order to deepen interest. And then this beautiful slide from one scene to the next, from the ambulance to Christmas. It's done so cleanly. Okay. I remember how her slender back would bend over the gifts under the lighted tree to read what only she could, and we were breathless with anticipation until the moment my mom placed the gift directly in our hands. My name was written phonetically in Korean, and we see the characters. I wonder if this is how my mom sees my name in her head, or does she only see my face? Or maybe she sees nothing at all. Misha, my name, written the way my mother says it. All my life I hated the sound. Misha. Now I save my mom's voice messages so that I can listen to her say my name long after she is gone. In memory of my mom, Myung Pak Myers. And so this by Michelle Myers. And so here, or if we were looking for it at the very beginning with her name, we come to understand that Misha means Michelle. So what is the story on the surface? And what is the story under the surface? We're going to stop screen sharing here just to talk about it. So the story on the surface seems to be a mother calls a daughter. The mother is dying of cancer. The father emotionally is not present. And that feels like enough, right? Usually the story on the surface or the situation can be summed up really quickly. But what's the story? What's happening underneath the surface? What is this actually about? I think it's clear that it's a story about translation, about relationships across languages and across countries. There are other answers, though. We could say that it's about losing a parent. We can say it's about a woman's relationship with her own name and what that name means to her. It tends to be that the story on the surface is really mundane. It's the concrete facts that we can grab onto, and the story under the surface is much more abstract and also much more emotionally powerful. Though I will say you can't really have story without situation. And as I mentioned before, the best stories live in their situations. So you can hardly tell the difference between the two. Yeah, so I really encourage people to just think. I do this for fun, nerd that I am, with songs that I listen to. Like, what is the story on the surface and what is the story under the surface? And then it's also great to do this with short stories. Again, brevity, the website 100 Word Story, the website Friday Flash Fiction. There's also a literary magazine called Battery Pack, in which every story is exactly 75 words. Those are great. I find that it's generally easier to pick out situation and story when the story is long. And when the story is short, the two are so intertwined and so masterfully navigated that it's really hard to pick out one from the other. I think it's also helpful to look at early drafts and places where the story is not yet clear, but the situation is. And I've just found that with practice, it's like a muscle, right? We develop these chops only through practice. And so I'm going to navigate over to another story here. This one is called Yentl. This is also from Brevity. Anyone who is interested in taking time to read the story on the website, feel free. If you just Google Brevity, you can click to the latest issue or the May issue. If anyone's watching this in the future, hello. And I'm going to share screen and we are going to take a look at this one other story before we go to our prompt and say adieu for now until next week. Okay. Okay. Yentl by Julie Marie Wade, May 1st, 2020. October 4th through 8, 1993. The film is nearly 10 years old by the time we watch it in world cultures. My classmates, all girls, all bored. I try to feign boredom as a way to fit in, but it's hard to hide what I'm feeling. It's also hard to explain. Yentl wants to study, so she cuts her hair and changes her clothes, pretends to be a boy named Anshul. But she's too pretty to be a boy, isn't she? I've never seen a boy with cheekbones like that. When I look at her, either way, long-haired girl she was, short-haired boy she becomes, my stomach pangs like it's lunchtime, but it's only 9 a.m. Later, when Anshul kisses Hadass, the woman she or he's supposed to marry. The pang becomes a tug, and the tug is lower than my stomach, hard and sharp, like my zipper is caught beneath me, and there's no way to pull it up. You should have seen the light, so soft, almost angelic. The faces in silhouette as they kiss and kiss, turning their heads every time their noses bump. Hadass wants to do more than kiss, but Anshul won't let things go any further. I want to know what doing more, what going further means exactly. I have never seen two women kiss like this before, and every time I think about their mouths coming together in the semi-light and semi-dark, I feel that tug again. It means something that isn't meant for words. Instead, I thank Ms. Curran for showing us the film. This is another day after class, no one else around. I say, it's so nice to see something progressive for once. My parents won't even let me watch picket fences because of what happened last spring. She doesn't know the show, doesn't know what happened. Oh, just because, well, the two teenage girls, they kissed each other. Ms. Curran is so nice, so progressive. She isn't a nun, and she kept her maiden name even after she got married. She chose not to have children and made sure we always wrote Ms., not Miss, the Gloria Steinem way. But now I see how her brow crinkles, how she twists her head like a corkscrew. This isn't like that, she says. Yentl isn't a lesbian. I startle to hear her say the word aloud. No, I mean, I know, but she played those scenes with Hadass. Miss Curran twists her head again. Hadass isn't a lesbian either. She really believes Anshul is a man. Instead of a tug, a sinking feeling, like a coin dropping into a well. But Barbara Streisand is a woman, and she kissed the other actress. I don't remember her name. In the end, it's still two women kissing, even if one of them is wearing a disguise. Ms. Curran becomes more adamant now, says it more firmly this time. No, it isn't, Julie. Intentions matter. Reasons matter. All Yentl wants is a good education, and all Hadass wants is a good husband. End of story. Whew. Okay. What a deep dive. I want to point to a few moments. The first is the details that the narrator chooses to bring out. So, but she's too pretty to be a boy, isn't she? I've never seen a boy with cheekbones like that. Why spend two sentences on her femininity rather than her masculinity, making it so clear that this is not a boy? And then the stomach pang. This is a stomach pang like it's lunchtime. This implies hunger. And by the end of the piece, we understand that it's sexual hunger. But early on, it feels like a mystery, maybe to those not initiated or not looking for it. And then you should have seen the light, so soft, almost angelic, their faces in silhouette as they kiss and kiss, turning their heads every time their noses bump. So again, with the sculpting of this piece, I imagine that there were a lot of details in here, though I cannot say for sure since I don't know this author, though I admire her very much. I cannot say for sure, but I would guess that there were a lot of details initially written, if not just details noticed in the experience, right? This is a movie that has a lot of other scenes. The narrator chose to exclude all scenes except this one. This is the detail that spoke to the story. So, what is the situation and what is the story? I've noticed comments in the chat box. If anybody feels like chiming in with their best guess, either now or after the Zoom session is over, of what the situation in the story is, I would love to hear other perspectives. But for now, I'll put forth my own best guess. To me, the situation is the narrator goes to class and watches a movie. And then on another day, the narrator thanks the teacher for showing the movie. And tries to put forth her interpretation of the movie or praise the movie and finds herself rejected by the teacher, or at least stifled, rather surprisingly, by the teacher. And then what is the story? Why should we care about this moment, this interaction? Well, to me, it's a story about a person who is asking permission to be themselves, who is looking for role models, or at least models, right? And who finds a glimmer of hope, finds something that moves her and inspires her, but then um, finds that her interpretation, what she thought was a glimmer of hope, uh, gets refuted by the person who was delivering it to her, right? That the teacher who she thought was encouraging her identity was actually shutting it down. And so it seems to me that by the end of the piece, with the teacher's closing dialogue, end of story, that this adult narrator, we don't know about the teenage narrator, but this adult narrator has figured out that the teacher is very limited in what she was able to allow or believe. And so, again, just a beautiful, that contrast between situation of just going to class and watching a movie and story of looking for permission to be oneself is really powerful. All right, let us close out with a prompt. So I'm going to share screen one last time for this week. Week 4 prompt. In no more than 800 words, write a true story in which you use exactly 3 different languages. Once you've written it, identify the story on the surface and the story underneath the surface. The reason I wanted to ask for 800 words is actually to make everyone's job easier. I know we're accustomed to 400, but I think longer word count allows a little more room for play and a little more room for putting down situation that can be cut later. I've heard writers say that they generally write at least twice as much in their first draft as they'll need for their final draft, because we can always anticipate cutting. It's a lot easier to cut than to add more at the last minute. So, and then to use 3 different languages, I feel one language, or right, so English could be one of these 3 languages. I think it could be really fun if both languages are spoken or written languages. I think it would also be very fun if these were languages of body language, of a sign language, language of math or music, or any of the other concepts we've discussed before, or the language developed between 2 people, right? Code words and nicknames. In all of the pieces we talked about today, language itself is very much pointed to, right? In my piece, To the Current Tenant, I, as a child, draw a waxy blue backslash. In the second story that we read, uh, there's the pronunciation, right, of the narrator's name. And in the third story, it's a battle about interpretations. It's the language of this movie, which the teacher and the narrator understand very differently. Now, the story on the surface and the story underneath the surface. I hope that this helps guide everyone's editing decisions, makes it easier to decide what details to include, and what details will actually free up the story or focus the story or make the story move faster. I'm going to stop share here and sign off for this week and just say I hope everyone is happy and healthy and safe. And if anyone has interest, if anyone knows high schoolers, I will actually be co-teaching for a high school summer writing workshop. It will be taught entirely online, so it's open up around the world. And it's taught through the Writing Institute. So anyone can go to the Writing Institute website to sign up. It seems it's been around for a long time. It's a great opportunity. People who want to write, people who want to act, specifically for high schoolers, and a little bit of fun and creativity in these rather uncertain times. Also, if anybody would care to get in touch with questions or comments, please feel free to reach me. You can email me at Samantha_Steiner at alumni.brown.edu. I've listed my email at the end of every previous video, so feel free to take a peek there. Hope everyone's well. Take care.